Tonight on Primetime, is the Ukraine war entering a diplomatic phase? Vladimir Putin says some of Donald Trump's ideas could help bring peace, while Volodymyr Zelensky is proposing direct talks with the Russian leader. Yet, despite the words, fighting continues and major differences remain unresolved. Could this be the beginning of a real peace process? Welcome to the program. I'm Andi Mioč. Our top story tonight is Europe's four-year conflict and a possible new venue for talks. Russian President Vladimir Putin has proposed a U.S. military facility in Alaska for negotiations with Ukraine after Volodymyr Zelensky called for a face-to-face meeting.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Thursday that Russia is fully prepared to negotiate with Ukraine at a U.S. military facility in Alaska. Speaking at the 29th St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, Putin said Russia remains ready to pursue a negotiated settlement based on a framework discussed with U.S. President Donald Trump in August last year.
We are absolutely ready and willing to reach an agreement with Ukraine through peaceful means, and on the basis we discussed at our meeting with President Trump in Anchorage. At that meeting, Russia was asked to consider certain compromises, and Russia is willing to accept the compromises we discussed in Anchorage. But the Ukrainian side must also agree to these compromises, and then the conflict will quickly come to its natural conclusion.
His comments come as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky published an open letter to Putin proposing a meeting between the two leaders to agree on an end to more than 4 years of war. Zelensky proposed setting a clear date for the meeting and said several countries had traditionally hosted leaders seeking to resolve wartime disputes, citing Switzerland, Turkey, and countries in the Arab world. Trump also backed the idea of a meeting between the two leaders, saying both sides would need to make compromises.
Well, I don't know. I'm glad that they're maybe talking about meeting. I think we had a lot to do with it. I know exactly what you're doing. But I think it would be great if they met. They should get it done. They're going to both make compromises. I suggested those compromises. And, you know, we've had a lot to do with it. We'd love to see their two very good people. They're two very, incredible countries, beautiful countries.
Meanwhile, Russia says its forces have taken control of a settlement in Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia region. The Russian Defense Ministry said its forces struck 142 areas over the past day, targeting Ukrainian long-range drone storage and launch sites, as well as energy and transport infrastructure used by Ukrainian forces. Ukraine also reported an attack on a Russian patrol ship. The vessel, measuring nearly 50 meters in length, was struck near the settlement of Yurkin in Russian-occupied Crimea.
Well, Ukrainians are weighing in on President Volodymyr Zelensky's call for direct talks with Vladimir Putin. Some see little chance of progress, while others say dialogue is the only path to peace.
President Volodymyr Zelensky published an open letter to Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday. In Kyiv, Ukrainians gave mixed reactions. Some dismissed the letter as unlikely to change Moscow's position, while others said any step toward dialogue was worth trying after years of war.
This letter is pointless. How can we stop the war when Russia has such unreasonable demands? The Russian Federation has made it clear that they want all of Ukraine. Zelensky could write 100 letters. It wouldn't make a difference. Until this invasion stops at the front lines, there will be no negotiations.
Vladimir Putin has ignored more than one such letter, more than one such appeal. I personally don't expect any feedback from him, but from a diplomatic standpoint, this is a fairly strong letter, which I think is addressed more to the Western world than to Vladimir Putin.
A step in the right direction. Just a word, even if it is in a letter, can lead to positive results. perhaps even to peace. If we don't talk, nothing will happen.
In the letter, Zelensky said it would be wrong to simply wait for the war to return to the center of US attention. He said peace could only come through direct engagement between Ukraine and Russia, and called for a full ceasefire during negotiations, something Putin had ruled out earlier on Thursday. In Moscow, the Kremlin said it had seen the letter and that Putin would be briefed on it.
Well, joining us now from Kyiv to talk on the latest developments in the Russia-Ukraine war is Olena Tregub, the Secretary General of the Independent Anti-Corruption Commission at Transparency International. Olena, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on Primetime. Now, why would you say that both Putin and Zelensky are signaling openness at this particular moment?
Well, this particular moment is a moment when there was change on the battlefield, when Ukraine actually took initiative on the battlefield. Ukraine is currently conducting a very successful operation to cut Russian military logistics. And this operation now does not allow for proper, attack of Russia on Ukraine. Right now, Ukraine uses our own mid-range drones that we developed, and we are hitting all their supply routes for the Russian army, basically. And on top of that, of course, we are using our long-range capabilities. We were able to, as you know, to hit the oil refinery at St. Petersburg, which is more than 1,000 kilometers. And so I think this is just another attempt of Zelensky to basically check whether Putin is ready to talk, to sit down and talk, because before all these negotiations that we had with the participation of Trump, they didn't have a lot of point, because at that time Putin wasn't really ready to concede anything. He wasn't ready for ceasefire. He wanted to win the war. But now it's a little bit questionable, to say the least, that Russia will be able to win the war and achieve its goals. And even during St. Petersburg Economic Forum, Russia presented scenarios, the way they see themselves. And those scenarios were very grim. Even in one of the scenarios, they acknowledged that Ukraine can be part of NATO and they would accept it.
Well, with all of these developments, not only on the battlefield, but far from it, as you've mentioned there, and Zelensky's call for a direct face-to-face meeting, could we possibly see finally a diplomatic opening?
I think we can only see this opening if there is increased pressure from the West. By this, I mean that we Ukrainians would receive additional weapons. We would receive those ballistic missile interceptors that we are currently lacking, and this is our vulnerability, and that's why Kyiv and other cities with ballistic missiles right now. Also that we would receive other weapons, like why we did not receive Taurus missile from Germany, even though we were promised by Chancellor Merz. We never received it. And also why the sanction packages, they are not as significant to basically have direct influence on Russian war machine in the nearest future. So all these measures, sanctions, weapons, money, freezing Russian assets, all these things should be done. If they are done, that Putin would accept, that he's not able to achieve his goals in this war, and it's better for him to stop, because otherwise he's losing his basically regime. He may lose his life. He may have internal situation inside Russia, which can be even dangerous for him, more dangerous for him than continuing the war. And the situations for him should be created in this way, that he feels that it's better for him, because right now he can continue the war. And basically, Ukraine alone cannot put him at negotiation table right now. I think so, but maybe in the future we will be able to. But right now I am rather skeptical because I think that the West should step up.
And Olena, obviously this war has been going on, the full-scale invasion has been going on for more than 4 years. Now we also have the situation in the Middle East. Now, when we look at the timing of these messages, both from Putin and Zelensky, would you say that these might be genuine steps towards peacemaking or just positioning ahead of any possible future talks?
Well, I think from Ukrainian side, this is genuine message. Everybody in Ukraine wants to stop the war. Ukrainians are the ones who suffer from this war the most. Every day our children are killed when they sleep in their beds at night, literally. This is very traumatizing for everybody. Our country is being ruined day by day. So Zelensky is representing Ukrainian people, and Zelensky knows that Ukrainian people, they do want to stop the war, but they want to stop it in a way that we need to make sure that the ceasefire that we have with Russia is not opening a door for invasion number 3, when Russia will just rearm and invade us even, in a more brutal way than previously. So we need to have stable peace, we need to have security guarantees and so on. So Zelensky knows all that, and he knows that right now probably conditions are not there yet. However, yes, he needs to demonstrate that he is trying. This letter that he wrote, it's a good letter. In Ukraine, actually, nobody is criticizing this letter. The worst thing that people may say is that this letter will bring no practical result, but that letter definitely will not hurt.
Well, on those practical results, Olena, what would you say are the biggest obstacles right now when it comes to any actual talks between Kyiv and Moscow? What are the key sticking points?
Well, as you know, one of the demands, for example, that Russia has is that they want us to give them away fully 2 regions, Donetsk and Lugansk region. However, they did not even manage to capture those regions militarily in more than 10 years of the war. So this is, first of all, unrealistic from even a legal perspective for a standing Ukrainian authority from constitutional point just to give away territory to a foreign country that is currently controlled by Ukraine. But also from the military point of view, the fact that Ukraine is able to basically stop Russian invasion is because we established a defense line. We have very strong fortifications, underground facilities and so on, the drone wall, the minefield and so on. So we can't just, if we give that, you understand that basically we are putting ourselves in position where Russia can directly go and invade our big cities such as Kharkiv, such as Zaporizhia, such any obstacles. And who will give us guarantee that once Russia doesn't have those mechanical obstacles, those physical obstacles, that Russia will, we should just trust Russia that they will not try to go invade more of Ukraine. And because of we don't have those guarantees, US is not ready to give us those guarantees, yes, Europe is not ready to give us guarantees. This is the main obstacle. I think if we know that we have a situation where we can stop the war at the contact line, and there are guarantees that we know that there are conditions created under which Russia will not go reinvade, then I think Ukraine will be definitely ready to negotiate. And
Olena, quite recently we've seen a major political change in Europe, the change of government in Hungary, no longer the veto holding Orban-led government. Do you expect Europe to be able to step up now and help Kyiv, and do you expect them to do so?
Well, frankly speaking, to be really honest, I don't think that Europe didn't step up because Orban was holding them back, and sometimes, very often, he was very convenient excuse, actually. The main problem of Europe is the fact that Russia managed to instigate fear on Europe, and Europe behaves very, very carefully towards Russia. Even if you talk to a lot of European leaders, they would say, hey, I don't think Ukraine can be ever at NATO. But Russia itself recognizes that Ukraine can be at NATO. But European leaders are like too worried and too afraid to basically even imagine this scenario sometimes. And so the problem is that Europe should step up their defense posture. Europe already is doing it. It's very good. They are gaining their strategic autonomy in terms of their, different spaces, defense, cyber, information, and so on. Once they feel confident enough, I just hope that they will also feel more confident towards Ukraine. And it's very good that election happened in Hungary. We already see results. We already see how Hungary started engaging with Ukraine in a positive way. My own organization is hosting an event here on developing defense cooperation, and Hungarian embassy were the first people to register, actually, and we're very pleased about that. So it's a good thing, but like I said, there is a bigger picture when Europe should become a geopolitical actor, really. And a very big defense actor.
And finally, Olena, in that European vein of things, Kiev has started its accession path. It has been fast-tracked to a certain point. How realistic is it that we see Ukraine join maybe right after Montenegro?
Well, from what we hear messaging from European Union that Ukraine needs to do a lot of reform, and they cannot give us a concrete date when this is going to happen. So definitely Ukrainians, they want this to happen quick, because we are probably the only country who paid for European integration with our own blood. The reason why Putin attacked Ukraine, according to Putin himself, as he spoke at one of the conferences in Russia just maybe a few months ago, is that Ukraine decided to go to Europe, and he didn't like that. He said that and this is something that provoked him to basically attack Ukraine. So, but Ukraine made the choice, and Ukraine is now fighting for this European choice. And I think it's not a matter of Ukrainian reforms, a matter of like all these bureaucratic rules of EU. They should be, of course, observed. Ukraine should be democracy, but Ukraine being member of EU, it's a geopolitical matter. It's a matter of security. So Europe should integrate Ukraine to be this geopolitical player about which I spoke earlier.
Olena, thank you so much for joining us on Primetime and sharing your insight and views.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
All right, after a short break, a US-backed ceasefire plan for Lebanon is already facing resistance, with Hezbollah rejecting key terms and Israel continuing military operations. Don't go away.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. News and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. One important note to this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are recording the 28th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro,
Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad,
Istanbul,
Kabul for A News.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime, and now it's time to take a look at the top business stories of the day with our very own Katie Wilson. Katie, what have you got for us tonight?
Yes, so SpaceX is preparing for its market debut, so we'll have more on that and all that's going on. We're also going to take a look at the drinks industry and Japanese innovation to make flying a bit greener. So, one of the most anticipated stock market debuts in history is about to take place, but despite its enormous size, Elon Musk's SpaceX won't be getting special treatment from Wall Street's most influential index. S&P Global has decided to keep its inclusion rules unchanged. Let's take a look.
SpaceX will not be getting fast-track entry into the S&P 500 after all. On Thursday, index operator S&P Global said it would not change the rules for inclusion. The rocket firm is set for a record share listing next week. That could see it raise $75 billion and secure a valuation of $1.75 trillion, immediately making it one of America's top 10 most valuable listed firms. But S&P says it won't change the rules to allow rapid entry into its benchmark index. Among other things, that requires a firm to be profitable in its most recent quarter, and in some for its last 4 quarters. That rules out SpaceX, which posted a loss of close to $5 billion in 2025. One analyst praised S&P for standing firm, saying the rules shouldn't be bent for unprofitable firms just because they are big. The rival Nasdaq index has taken a different view, however. It has already changed its rules to allow easier access for newly listed so-called mega-cap stocks. That will force Nasdaq tracker funds to buy large sums of SpaceX shares. The same could be true for OpenAI and Anthropic if the chatbot makers proceed with hotly anticipated IPOs. Separately Thursday, SpaceX began a roadshow for investors ahead of its listing. Musk spoke to JP Morgan clients in a video interview with bank boss Jamie Dimon. Other major lenders, including Bank of America and Morgan Stanley, are hosting events over the coming days.
Let's get more as the company's blockbuster stock market debut is attracting global attention. But some investors find themselves on the sidelines as access to SpaceX's website and IPO materials is restricted in Hong Kong and mainland China.
SpaceX's website and IPO marketing documents weren't accessible in Hong Kong and mainland China on Friday. That's what a Reuters review showed. It threatens to cut participation by investors there in a listing expected to be the world's largest. Bloomberg reported sources had said SpaceX's underwriters have barred investors in China and Hong Kong from taking part in the IPO. It cited regulatory and compliance concerns. Elon Musk's SpaceX aims to raise $75 billion in a deal that would value the company at $1.75 trillion. That would make it one of the 10 most valuable US-listed firms. The company kicked off marketing roadshows on Thursday in New York. It also posted its IPO roadshow materials on its website. A Reuters review found they were accessible in most major Asian markets except for mainland China and Hong Kong. Investors access a company's IPO marketing materials to better understand their business and financial details. Reuters couldn't immediately find why and since when the websites of SpaceX and the IPO materials were restricted in mainland China and Hong Kong. SpaceX didn't immediately respond to Reuters' requests for comment outside US working hours. The SpaceX IPO has global interest and the listing could become the first US market debut in excess of $1 trillion.
To the broader markets now, where investors were taking a more cautious approach. Technology shares led declines on Friday as traders locked in profits and kept a close eye on renewed tensions in the Middle East.
Asian share markets tumbled on Friday as investors took profits on technology stocks and turned defensive ahead of the weekend. There was wariness of the flare-up in the Middle East hostilities, with US-Iran peace talks in limbo. The Iran-backed Hezbollah militia rejected a new ceasefire in Lebanon on Thursday, and Israel said it would not withdraw troops from the country, undermining US President Donald Trump's efforts to halt fighting there and reach a peace deal with Tehran. Meanwhile, an AI-driven sell-off after chipmaker Broadcom reported underwhelming results on Wednesday continued into a second day. All that left MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan down 1.8% in Asian trade. South Korea's tech-heavy Kospi plunged as much as 7%, and Japan's Nikkei fell 1.6%. Oil prices were little changed, as traders awaited more clarity on US-Iran negotiations, though were set for a weekly gain as hostilities earlier in the week raised concerns of a prolonged energy shock. European shares slipped at the open and were on track to end the week marginally lower, also rattled by the uncertainty. The Pan-European Stock 600 index edged 0.2% down in early trade. Technology stocks also led declines among sectors with a 2% drop. They eased after a strong rally that's helped the shares gain over 33% in the past 2 months, the most among Stock 600 sectors.
Takeover speculation continues to swirl around one of Europe's biggest low-cost airlines. A new report says US investment firm Castlelake may be seeking support as it explores a potential bid for EasyJet.
A possible takeover of British airline EasyJet took another twist on Thursday. A report said US investment firm Castlelake is looking at MSC as a partner in a consortium for a potential bid. The update came from Italian daily Corriere della Sera. MSC is a Swiss-based global group which covers container shipping, cruise ships, logistics and more. Thursday's report comes a week after Castlelake said it was in the early stages of considering a takeover of EasyJet, although no formal approach has been made. British takeover rules give the firm until June 26th to make a firm bid or walk away. EasyJet has called Castlelake's timing highly opportunistic. Analysts argue the carrier's low valuation, slots at key airports and stable fleet make it a prime takeover target. Corriere reported Castlelake hopes to partner with MSC to ensure its bid complies with EU ownership rules. MSC and EasyJet wouldn't comment on the report. Castlelake didn't immediately respond to a Reuters request for comment. EasyJet shares have gained about 15% since Castlelake's interest was revealed. They were up again just over 2% in early trade on Thursday.
Coca-Cola says it's adapting to consumers who are becoming increasingly selective about spending. The drinks giant is looking at new ways to keep its products affordable, whilst navigating economic pressures and uncertainty in the Middle East.
Coca-Cola is rethinking how to make its drinks more affordable, as the beverage giant sees some of its customers are struggling with rising costs. That's what Coca-Cola's CFO John Murphy told the Deutsche Bank Consumer Conference in Paris on Thursday. Murphy said the company, which raised its annual profit target in April, was navigating the disruption from the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran, quote, not perfectly well, but without fear, without trepidation. He called the outlook in the Middle East still not clear, and added it would be a focal point as the company goes into next year. Coca-Cola is leaning on a mix of pack sizes, formats, and price points, from smaller, lower-cost single-serve options to larger and premium offerings to cater to a wider range of consumers, while keeping prices affordable for budget-conscious shoppers. Recent earnings from major U.S. retailers suggest consumers remain resilient but are spending more selectively. Rising gas prices linked to the Iran war and persistent inflation are weighing on budgets. Murphy said some consumers are resilient while others aren't, and pointed to those earning $50,000 to $60,000 as being under particular strain. Shares of Coca-Cola were little changed in Thursday morning trading, but have risen about 13% so far this year, slightly better than the S&P 500.
And finally, from kitchen waste to cleaner skies, Japan is ramping up an ambitious effort to turn used cooking oil into sustainable aviation fuel. Households across the country are being asked to help power the next generation of flights.
In her Tokyo kitchen, Japanese homemaker Maki Watanabe carefully pours used cooking oil into a plastic bottle. Thanks to her frequent home cooking, she donates around 10 gallons of cooking oil a year. And it's all part of a nationwide push to turn household waste into sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, which offers massively reduced greenhouse emissions compared to the regular stuff. Watanabe hopes more people join the effort, saying fueling jets will take huge amounts of oil. Such contributions join a growing stream of used waste collected through the Fry to Fly initiative. This comes as the Iran war disrupts global energy supplies and drives up costs for resource-poor Japan. The country is turning to ordinary consumers to help meet an ambitious target of sourcing 10% of its airline fuel from SAF by 2030. The world's fourth biggest economy estimates it will need about 450 million gallons of SAF that year. It is banking on domestically sourced used cooking oil, one of the cheapest and most accessible feedstocks. Yet progress remains painfully slow. Right now, domestic SAF production accounts for just 0.3% of Japan's jet fuel use due to limited supply and infrastructure. Yuki Nishimura from JGC Holdings' Energy Innovation Unit says geopolitical tensions are making SAF more important.
Given the current situation in the Middle East, the value of alternative fuel sources has been increasing. In fact, I believe that the value of biofuels, including SAF, are driven up by the present circumstances. Therefore, we intend to continue our efforts in this area. These initiatives are important, not only from an environmental perspective, but also because they can serve as a valuable alternative to conventional petroleum products.
Tokyo's government is stepping up used cooking oil collection from its 7.8 million households. This official says they realized residents did not know how to capture and store the waste, so they distributed 13,000 special funnels and saw collection volumes double. But even if Japan collected every drop of available used cooking oil, it would meet only about a quarter of the 2030 SAF target. That means imports are expected to be necessary for years.
That's your business news roundup for this evening. Back to you, Andy.
Very interesting stuff as always, Katie. Thank you so much. All right, after a short break, we will take a look at the latest U.S. ceasefire proposal in Lebanon, which is already meeting some resistance. Don't go away.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. One important note to this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we're reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul for A News.
Welcome back to Primetime. A ceasefire meant to calm one of Middle East's most volatile fronts is already under strain after Hezbollah rejected a US-backed proposal. Meanwhile, Israel says its troops are staying put, and the fallout is raising new questions about wider efforts to ease regional tensions.
A new US brokered ceasefire initiative is facing immediate resistance after Hezbollah rejected the proposal and Israel signaled it will continue military operations in southern Lebanon. The developments come as Lebanese media report that 6 people were killed and 8 others injured in Israeli airstrikes on eastern and southern Lebanon, despite the renewed ceasefire agreement. The plan, announced by Washington, would require Hezbollah to halt attacks and withdraw its fighters from areas near the Israeli border. But Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem dismissed the agreement, saying the group was not part of the negotiations and describing the proposal as unacceptable. Israel, meanwhile, says its forces will remain in southern Lebanon for the time being, with Defense Minister Israel Katz confirming that military operations will continue. On the ground, Israeli strikes continued across southern Lebanon, while Lebanese army units and heavy machinery were seen operating in areas near the border. The fighting has also taken a toll on international peacekeepers. The United Nations says a Serbian soldier serving with the UN mission in Lebanon was killed after mortar fire struck a peacekeeping position near Mar Hayun. 2 other peacekeepers were wounded in the incident. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres condemned the attack and called for those responsible to be held accountable.
7 peacekeepers serving with UNIFIL have now been killed following the escalation of hostilities, and several more have been wounded. We reiterate that attacks on peacekeepers must stop. They are grave violations of international humanitarian law and of Security Council Resolution 1701. And as we've been saying, these killings may amount to war crimes. Those responsible must be held to account. All must respect international law and protect those serving in the cause of peace. The Secretary General again urges all actors to respect the cessation of hostilities that was announced on April 6th.
The latest setback comes as US President Donald Trump insists progress is still being made. Speaking at the White House, Trump said he believes discussions aimed at reducing tensions are moving forward and that Lebanon deserves peace.
They didn't reject that. And they're looking, I think Hezbollah, I will tell you, they called us and they said, how about stopping? And I think you're going to see things happen over there. That's been like a little bit of a different world, but it's interconnected with Iran. And it would be really nice if Lebanon could have some peace. Lebanon's been under attack for so many years and always like an underdog. And it would be really nice if it could end. And I spoke to Bibi Netanyahu about that. And I speak to them about it. And I actually spoke to Hezbollah about it. And I think progress is made. That's been going on for a long time. You know, when you look at that for years and years, 48 years, I say, well, let's get this settled. How long has it been going on? 48 years. I said, that's a long time.
For now, however, renewed fighting and conflicting positions on the ceasefire continue to cast doubt over prospects for a broader regional de-escalation.
Well, joining us now to take a closer look at the situation in Lebanon is Parsa Imran, co-founder and managing editor of West Asia Watch. Parsa, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on Primetime. Now, looking at what the sides are saying, if Hezbollah says it was never part of the negotiations, was this ceasefire initiative in a way fundamentally flawed from the very start?
First of all, I would like to say that I truly appreciate the invitation to your channel. Thank you for having me. Now, to begin with, I would like to address your question. Yeah, partially, but like the central weakness of the initiative is that it was negotiated between Israel, Lebanon, and the United States. While Hezbollah, the main armed actor fighting Israel, was not a formal participant, Hezbollah has openly rejected the framework and argues that any kind of agreement requiring its withdrawal without a parallel Israeli withdrawal amounts to surrender. That said, the initiative was not necessarily designed to secure Hezbollah's consent immediately. It appears, to me, it appears intended to strengthen the authority of the Lebanese state and create a diplomatic framework in which the Lebanese armed forces gradually replace non-state actors in the south. So basically the problem is that implementation ultimately depends on Hezbollah's behavior, whether or not it signed the agreement. So yeah.
Well, Israel appears willing to accept the ceasefire framework while keeping its troops on the ground in South Lebanon. Is this an attempt to create a new security reality in the south of the country?
Well, in my opinion, it is both. From Israel's perspective, the objective is not merely to stop fire temporarily, but to prevent a return to the pre-war status quo. Israeli officials have consistently argued that Hezbollah's military presence near the border is unacceptable, and that any ceasefire must produce structural security changes. The proposed arrangement envisions Lebanese state control and the exclusion of armed non-state actors from key southern areas. And for Hezbollah and many other Lebanese critiques, however, Israeli forces remain inside Lebanese territory, undermine the very definition of the ceasefire. They see it as an effort to institutionalize a new security buffer under Israeli military leverage rather than a mutual cessation of hostilities, in my opinion.
And Parsa, how much of the Lebanon file is now tied to the broader United States-Iran negotiations taking place behind the scenes?
Well, a great deal, but not completely, in my opinion. The Lebanon front has become one of the principal pressure points in the wider US-Iran confrontation. Tehran has also linked regional de-escalations to developments in Lebanon and continues to view Hezbollah as its most important regional partner. Iran has also demanded Israeli to withdraw as part of any broader stabilization effort. But however, I think that Washington and Israel have repeatedly tried to separate the Hezbollah issue from direct US-Iran negotiations, arguing that Lebanon should be handled through its own track. So the reality is that these tracks are politically interconnected even when they are diplomatically separate.
Among the reports of casualties we've been witnessing each day, we've also seen the news of the death of another UN peacekeeper. How much is UNIFIL relevant at this point?
So basically, operational constraint, if we talk about operational constraint, yes, completely irrelevant. UNIFIL was created to monitor, report, and support state authority, not to impose peace by force. As armed actors increasingly ignore its presence, its ability to shape battlefield outcomes has dismissed, and the mission cannot compel Hezbollah to disarm or force Israel to withdraw. Yet UNIFIL still serves three important functions, in my opinion: maintaining communication channels during crisis. Number two, we have providing independent reporting on violations. Number three, acting as a symbolic and practical international presence that reduces the risk of uncontrolled escalations. So the recent peacekeeper casually underscores how dangerous and limited its operating environment has become.
And Parsa, in your mind, who currently wields the most influence over what happens next? Is it Hezbollah? Is it Tel Aviv? Is it Beirut, Tehran, Washington?
Okay, as per my knowledge, I feel like at this stage, The greatest influence lies with parties that can directly alter conditions on the ground. Like Israel retains significant leverage because it controls key military decisions, including whether to maintain, expand, or reduce its presence in the southern Lebanon. Hezbollah remains equally critical because no arrangement can be sustained if it chooses continued confrontations rather than compliance. Beyond the immediate battlefield, Iran's influence is substantial due to its long-standing relationships with Hezbollah and its broader regional strategy. Tehran may not dictate every tactical decision, but its position will heavily shape the movement's strategically calculations. The United States, if we talk about United States, so the United States remains the most important external diplomatic actor. Washington can exert pressure, offer incentives, and help break understandings, but its influence is largely directly and depends on the willingness of the local actors to cooperate. And if we talk about the Lebanese government, it was basically the central, from a legal and diplomatic standpoint, yet it is practically, yet its practical ability to determine the outcomes remain more limited than that of the armed and external actors who are involved in this matter. If I shortly explain it to you, it means that the future trajectory is likely to be determined primarily by the interaction between Israeli decision, Hezbollah's response, and Iran's strategic calculations, with the United States acting as the key mediator and Lebanon attempting to translate any agreement into a sustainable political and security framework.
Bajda, thank you so much for joining us on Primetime and sharing your thoughts. All right, after a short break, the United States and Iran appear closer to a diplomatic breakthrough, but political pressure in Washington is raising questions about what comes next. Do stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. One important note to fears. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kiev, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for AU.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Efforts to ease tensions between the United States and Iran appear to be entering a new phase, with fresh diplomatic activity raising cautious hopes of progress. But as talks continue, political pressure in Washington is adding another layer of uncertainty.
Efforts to ease tensions between the United States and Iran may be gaining momentum, with a new round of talks expected on Friday, and reports of a possible preliminary agreement between the two sides. Sources say the proposed deal would establish an initial framework for future negotiations, while allowing diplomats to continue working on unresolved issues before a final agreement is reached.
But if it happens, it could happen like over the weekend.
President Donald Trump says negotiations are progressing well and has suggested a deal could come as soon as this weekend. He also said he would not rule out meeting Iran's supreme leader if a peace agreement is reached. Trump reiterated that preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons remains Washington's top priority. He also repeated claims that earlier US strikes destroyed Iranian nuclear facilities. The president revealed that the United States had considered sending troops to Iranian nuclear sites to remove enriched uranium, but ultimately decided against it because of the risks of casualties and a prolonged military engagement. Meanwhile, reports suggest the preliminary agreement could be called the Islamabad Declaration, reflecting Pakistan's role as a mediator in the negotiations. Sources say Pakistan could announce the agreement ahead of further talks involving senior US and Iranian negotiators. But as diplomatic efforts continue abroad, Trump is facing growing political pressure at home. The Republican-led House of Representatives has approved a resolution directing the president to withdraw US troops from Iran unless Congress authorizes military action. The measure passed by a vote of 215 to 208, with 4 Republicans joining Democrats in support. Although the resolution is largely symbolic for now, the vote highlights increasing concern among some lawmakers over the conflict. Trump has criticized the measure, calling it unpatriotic and arguing it comes at a critical stage in efforts to end the war. The White House, meanwhile, continues to defend its policy, insisting military operations against Iran are necessary to prevent the country from developing a nuclear weapon.
Well, to talk on the latest signals from Washington and Tehran, we're joined by political scientist Daniela Mello, coming to us from Lisbon. Daniela, welcome. Always great to have you on the program. Now, we've been hearing reports of this initial deal for days now, but today we hear from Tehran a message that Hezbollah, rather Lebanon, must be a part of the deal. What does that tell us about the state of negotiations behind closed doors?
Well, thank you for having me once again. The state of negotiations has not apparently evolved much from last week. And if there was an evolution, it was towards Tehran hardening its position that any negotiations that do not involve a ceasefire in Lebanon are not going to be fruitful. And thus, Tehran has successfully, it seems this week, put sufficient pressure on the United States for the United States to in turn put sufficient pressure on Israel for a ceasefire, however imperfect, to be put into place so that negotiations could go forth. Now, this is obviously an imperfect ceasefire, but it's a ceasefire that allows or it's a request for a ceasefire that allows Donald Trump at home to signal to its public that it wants to continue negotiating and that it's doing all that it can, and that he's doing all that he can to continue these negotiations with Tehran. This is particularly important because, as we know, the American public has always been against this conflict, and the longer the conflict goes, the worse are the polls in terms of public opinion in the United States. Donald Trump also needed to be seen this week pressuring Bibi Netanyahu on this issue. So that was a second result of the inclusion of Iran making sure that Lebanon is not excluded from the negotiations. Why do I say that Donald Trump also needed to put pressure on Bibi Netanyahu? Because just like the war in Iran, the polls in the United States show very clearly that the American public does not support the actions of Bibi Netanyahu, be it in Lebanon, but most certainly not in Iran. Many Americans see, including Americans within the MAGA movement, see Bibi Netanyahu as being largely responsible for persuading President Trump to enter this conflict, a conflict that is deeply unpopular. So the inclusion of Lebanon was really the central piece of the negotiations this week, and that alone shows the weaknesses on the side of the United States, the internal domestic weaknesses produced by a democratic system in which political leaders are accountable to the population, and the fact that Iran was able to exploit that to be able to successfully pressure the United States towards its position when it comes to Lebanon.
Well, when it comes to optics, we've also heard the U.S. president saying he would be willing to meet Iran's supreme leader if they were to make a deal. How much of that messaging is aimed exactly at domestic audiences to tell them, okay, we want to wrap this up?
It's aimed at domestic audiences, and it's aimed at Middle Eastern audiences, and especially the Iranian leadership. Because Donald Trump, in spite of his bellicose rhetoric that is ever present, he believes in this coercive dissuasion in which there's always the threat of military action while trying to enter negotiations. And Donald Trump seems to believe that that threat of military action is what can give him an edge in the negotiations. However, in spite of that language, Donald Trump continues to signal that, number one, that he wants to be done with this conflict. Number two, that a negotiated solution is preferable to reigniting the war. Again, going back to my previous point about public opinion in the United States and where it stands, right now, re-engaging in the conflict with Iran, given the resistance of the American public to this issue, would in fact be highly detrimental to the Republican Party, especially in a year of elections. Now, it's true that the president seems to be less concerned about what's going to happen in November when the Congress goes to vote than the Republican Party wishes that he was. But as of now, projections show that the Republican Party is going to suffer major losses, and any reigniting of the conflict and failure of negotiations really risks turning American public opinion even farther away from the Republican position, and certainly from this president, who has seen since the beginning of this conflict the worst approval ratings of any of his administrations.
And now that you mentioned the midterms coming up, we've seen a single step made in Congress regarding to limiting what the U.S. president can do militarily in Iran. Do you see that certain voices in the Republican Party are dissenting from the administration on the Iran issue?
We can see, and this is a great follow-up from what we were just discussing, because we can see that for the first time since the beginning of the second term of Donald Trump in January of last year, Congress, and when I say Congress, I mean even members of the Republican Party within Congress, are aligning themselves increasingly with public opinion and away from Donald Trump. Now, when Donald Trump came to power, he made it very clear, came to power the second time, he made it very clear that he wanted loyalty above all else, from not just his cabinet members, but also from members of his party. As we know, he also controls indirectly the financing of campaigns of all the candidates for the Republican Party. So he has a very strong hold over Congress. And it's important for us to understand that also over the past few weeks, the president has been sponsoring MAGA individuals, or individuals that he considers more MAGA than the Republicans who are already incumbent in his party. And in fact, we've had a number of primaries in which the Republican candidate was defeated by a candidate that Donald Trump had supported. Why do I say this? Because this is creating a malaise within the Republican Party that we see reflected particularly this week. It's the junction of multiple factors. On one hand, the foreign policy decisions of the president, specifically this engagement with Iran, the lack, or apparent lack anyway, of a strategy to be able to finalize its negotiations and extricate ourselves in the United States from this conflict. Internally, those who have not touted the line with Donald Trump are being attacked directly by the president. And some of them, having lost the primaries in the past 2 or 3 weeks, have suddenly felt free to vote as they wished on the question of Iran and on the question of limiting the power of the president to continue this war in Iran. And that's why we're seeing this type of vote now in Congress. That's why we're now having individuals in the Republican Party siding with the Democrats. On one hand, they understand that, if they're free agents, if they owe nothing to the president, they can vote their wishes. On the other hand, they also understand that the public has completely turned against this war, and that this is an untenable situation for the Republican Party to have a president, to be going into elections when the president is this unpopular and its foreign policy is this unpopular. So even though this resolution is probably not going to really go anywhere symbolically, it's really important that we are seeing this distancing of the Congress and of members of the Republican Party from the hard line of the president.
And Daniela, what would you say is the off-ramp here for the Trump administration? What is some set minimum they could point to and say, all right, mission accomplished, we are going back home?
The message about mission accomplished has changed tremendously throughout the course of this conflict. And I mean, the messaging coming from Washington, D.C. Let's recall that at the beginning of this conflict, the United States, however disorganized a manner, did present some strategic goals. Those strategic goals included the enrichment of uranium by the Iranians, ballistic missiles, and support for proxies in the region. These were all the goals that the United States seemed to be pursuing at the beginning of the conflict. If we add some of the goals from Iran, I think we could say quite clearly even regime change being one of the goals. At this juncture, the only goal out of those that stands is enrichment of uranium. Israel clearly is still very concerned with the proxies. That's why it keeps targeting Hezbollah in Lebanon while it can. By that I mean before the United States absolutely puts down an order, as the United States seemed to start doing this week, that Israel won't be able to do it. So right now, the only thing that really is being discussed at all is the enrichment of uranium. And this is, I would say, the red line for the administration, because at this juncture, it won't be able to get Iran to abdicate support for its proxies. And again, the events of this week and bringing in Hezbollah really demonstrate that. It won't be able to get a deal in which Iran would be willing to abdicate its middle-range ballistic missiles, because then Iran would defang itself. It wouldn't be able to defend itself, and it's certain that the Iranians are going to appeal to their own sovereignty and not bring that to the table. So the only thing left on the table is indeed the uranium, and whether or not the Iranians abdicate all of the uranium that is still within their territory and commit to not enriching uranium, at least for a period of a few years. That's really the only thing that the Americans may be able to accomplish. I didn't even talk about the Hormuz, which I see we're showing now, because Hormuz was not an original demand, because Hormuz was open before this conflict. So opening the Strait of Hormuz is obviously a very important aspect of this. The global economy depends on it. But when it comes to the strategic goals of this war for the United States, that's the last thing standing, and that's the thing that Donald Trump absolutely needs to have, because if he accomplishes that, if he accomplishes the removal of uranium from Iran, its destruction, and some sort of timeline of no enrichment whatsoever, he can claim that he got at least one aspect of the deal that was superior to the deal from 2015 under the Obama administration, in which Iran was able to maintain some of its uranium enrichment activities under the auspices of the IAEA.
And just a short follow-up in the end, Daniela, what would you say a successful outcome of any further negotiations would be for Tehran?
Well, for Tehran, survival is a great success out of these negotiations. But Tehran is also interested, obviously, in the lifting of sanctions, in being able to get some of its money that is frozen around the world available to them so that they can rebuild, so that they can reignite their economy. So those, I would say, are some of the red lines for the Iranians as well. They need sanctions lifted. They need to have access to liquidity in order to be able to rebuild infrastructure and everything else in the country and be able to survive long-term and face or be able to face any economic crisis that they're enduring right now within the country. What's interesting here is that this war, so far anyway, has really produced let's call it a geopolitical redistribution of power that was not intentional by the warring parties. So none of the strategic objectives of the United States and Israel have been completely achieved. So in the United States still don't have an Iranian. Iran still has the same amount of enriched uranium, and there's, the Revolutionary Guard is still in power. Israel still has not been able to destroy Hezbollah or Hamas or Iran. And Iran survived, but it's paying a very high price for that survival. If it continues to survive and if it gets to the point of actually signing some sort of peace agreement with the United States, Iran might actually re-emerge from this conflict as a far more meaningful, stronger force within the region than they were before the conflict. And let me tell you, that's definitely unintentional, certainly on the side of the Americans and of the Israelis. So we are really looking at the reorganization of the balance of power in the Middle East.
Daniela, thank you kindly for coming on Primetime and sharing your insight and analysis.
Thank you.
Well, after a short break, EU leaders and Western Balkan countries meet in Montenegro as Brussels looks to revive enlargement and strengthen its influence in the region. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. European Union and Western Balkans leaders gathered in the Montenegrin town of Tivat to discuss the bloc's enlargement agenda. The issue has gained urgency amid Russia's war in Ukraine, with Brussels seeking to strengthen stability and reduce outside influence in the region. Germany and France have proposed allowing candidate countries greater access to EU programs and the single market before full membership, in an effort to make the process more attractive and credible. Leaders at the summit outlined their vision for accelerating enlargement while maintaining reform requirements.
Of course, there are a number of questions we need to answer together. But above all, it must be clear that this part of Europe belongs to the European Union in the long term. And the fact that we haven't admitted any new members for 13 years shows that the shortcomings also lie with the European Union. And that is what we want to overcome today.
Enlargement is merits-based, but merits-based does not mean slow. We have to make the enlargement process faster and more credible. In other words, if the candidate country delivers on reforms, it has to move forward in closing and opening chapters and clusters on its path forward towards the European Union. And the enlargement process has to be more visible. The candidate countries have to explain to their people the benefits of enlargement.
Well, to talk on the EU Western Balkans Summit in Tivat, the Union's accession procedures and its global positioning, we're now joined by Angel Petrov, journalist at Dnevnik, coming to us from Sofia. Welcome, thank you so much for joining us. Now, let's start with the host. With the drafting of an accession treaty now formally underway, do you see Montenegro becoming, as Podgorica likes to say, the 28th member by 2028?
Well, this has become very controversial. If you listen to Ms. von der Leyen today, it seems the answer is yes. She even sees a faster track maybe before 2028. The thing is that Montenegro is being built as the big EU success story because, as the officials at the Western Balkans Summit said, you need some kind of, of either you could call it a carrot, a morale boost because of the EU not having absorbed a new member in 13 years. But there's some chapters that might take a while to close. The fight against corruption is not always convincing in Montenegro. And moreover, it seems that EU officials are concerned with Serbian efforts to possibly delay all their closing of all chapters that need to be closed. which means that we can be sure that whatever von der Leyen says can be taken for granted. It could be a bumpy road. However, it seems that Montenegro has gone the extra mile over the past year to make sure that as many chapters as can be closed are closed. But we shouldn't say that it's a done deal and wait a bit, and perhaps we saying the EU perhaps extend a bit of a more helping hand to Montenegro, while not making it as obvious as we have been doing over the past year, because we have been playing good cop, bad cop, and we have been labeling countries as, you know, the big nerd is Montenegro, and they are the laggards that are doing nothing, and this is not exactly the kind of carrot and stick approach that enlargement needs at the moment.
Angel, there's also talk of changing the accession treaties for future members to include certain guardrails, following experiences with the former Orban-led government in Hungary using its veto power. How necessary would you say that might be?
I think that the new members understand this, and I think that the combination between this and the prospect of a gradual accession, whatever form it may take, regardless of whether it looks like the non-paper that of Germany and France that have been discussed, or other forms of phased integration, I think this can be solved by local leaders to local publics, and I think this can be solved, more importantly even, by Brussels to member states, because you can say they are advancing step by step without full rights at the beginning, by only joining some parts, and even this gradual integration can be reversed or frozen temporarily if needed. So this could strike the right balance between all the concerns that both member states and local leaders have been having. And it seems that this kind of a balance is being also discussed at the EU Western Balkans Summit in Tivat today.
And this gradual benefiting from membership without being officially in the club, would you say that can be an incentive enough for the region's capitals to push on with the reforms Brussels has outlined?
Well, not for all capitals, and it also will depend on the specific leader. If a leader can, again, sell this to the public, it would also depend on how high support is in the respective country for EU integration. Serbia, I'm not quite sure, because as we are well aware, support for the EU has dropped for different reasons we needn't discuss right now, but there are people in Serbia, critical mass, who believe that, for example, China is the biggest partner, investor to Serbia, etc., whereas this is actually EU countries. And you have to convince this kind of public that they're not just getting trimmed down benefits in the form of something they cannot capitalize upon. And how Vučić can sell this? This could be tricky. Albania, for example, Montenegro, whose treaty is being drafted right now and can serve as a pilot case, maybe in their cases, for example, it would be easier to sell it. North Macedonia, given the current blockade, de facto blockade that they're having by the EU, on which they blame us in Bulgaria, I'm not sure that there it will be an easy sell either. So again, depends on the country.
Exactly as you say, it depends on the country. All of them are at different stages of their accession paths. One of them isn't even recognized by all EU members as a state.
Right.
Now, with that being said, how do you think the apparent fast-tracking of the process for Ukraine and Moldova might impact the public and the leaders of these Western Balkans?
Well, on the one hand, they don't seem very happy. On the other hand, this is an incredible opportunity for them to actually step in the limelight and say, come on, we are being mistreated. Because for Ukraine, because of the war, with all due respect, the bar is being set a bit lower than it's for us right now. So I think they can make lemonade out of these lemons. But it's tricky because it's very hard to find a very wide window of time when actually attention is focused on the Western Balkans. Like now, in a few months, depending on what happens in, let's say, Serbia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. You're aware, and I'm sure you have coverage of the story with the High Representative for Bosnia-Herzegovina, for example. That might still be the case. They might still be on the EU's radar. But what happens in 1 year, 2 years, especially if you have to sort out the contours of a peace deal with Russia, if you have to sort out the future relation with Iran, let's say, it's difficult to think that the Western Balkans can stay on the radar that long. That being said, the process of integrating Ukraine can give them some visibility to raise demands and to say, come on, this is fair, this is not fair, but also to talk to their publics of the need to do painful reforms to catch up with Ukraine. Because actually Ukraine, regardless of where we think that the bar is being set lower, has achieved a lot ever since it became clear that it will enjoy some kind of a special relationship regarding accession. And also to have to convince a lot of member states that it's worth it, including Hungary right now, which means that actually the bar is not set that low and that it can serve as some kind of a role model, and case in point that actually, if you do your homework, especially under pressure, because they cannot criticize it for being lenient with itself at the moment, you can achieve a lot. So actually, I think that this kind of a division, which looks a bit discriminatory, will be to the benefit of the region and not to the detriment of it.
Angel, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insight.
Thank you for having me.
All right, after a short break, we'll check in with our top stories, the ones that we haven't given you yet, and our correspondents around the globe. Don't go away.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. One important note to fears. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing,
Bangkok,
Tbilisi,
Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan,
Tehran, Islamabad,
Istanbul,
Kabul for AU.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. 5 Azerbaijani citizens have been killed and 3 others injured after 2 cargo vessels were struck in the Sea of Azov. The attack has prompted a response from Baku as officials work to assist those affected and establish further details of the incident.
5 Azerbaijani citizens were killed and 3 others injured in a drone attack on 2 foreign cargo vessels in the Sea of Azov, Azerbaijan's foreign ministry said on Friday. The strikes reportedly took place overnight, targeting the cargo ships in Taganrog Bay. Azerbaijani nationals were among those on board. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Aykan Hajizada said a total of 25 Azerbaijani citizens were traveling on the 2 vessels at the time of the attack. He added that neither ship was owned by Azerbaijan. According to information provided by Russian authorities, the 3 wounded were taken to a hospital in the Russian city of Yeysk. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galuzin accused Ukraine of carrying out the strikes on the cargo vessels. Ukraine said earlier on Friday that its drones had struck 5 ships in the ports of Mariupol and Berdyansk on the Sea of Azov, as well as in the coastal waters of Russian-occupied territories. Robert Brovdy, the commander of Ukrainian drone forces, said in a statement that his drones had hit dry cargo ships and a tanker that were involved in stealing Ukrainian grain and transferring military cargo and fuel, with the names of the vessels painted over and their radars turned off. Russia's foreign ministry said 2 ships, the Natra and Zircon, had been sailing from Turkey to Rostov-on-Don in southern Russia when they came under attack from Ukrainian drones. Azerbaijani authorities are coordinating with relevant officials, while embassy staff have been deployed to the area. Officials say efforts are focused on supporting Azerbaijani citizens involved in the attack, facilitating their return home and providing consular assistance.
The United States has sanctioned Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel, freezing his assets and those of his family, as Washington continues to ramp up pressure on the island country. U.S. President Donald Trump called Cuba a, quote, failed nation and suggested Washington may take further action once it wraps up military operations in Iran. Ira Spitzer has more.
According to a filing on the Treasury Department's website, the U.S. has imposed personal sanctions on Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel, along with his wife and others. Cuba's armed forces and its internal surveillance network were also added to the Treasury blacklist, as well as a son of former President Raul Castro, who served as an advisor on defense and national security. The sanctions are the latest move in a broader escalation that has been building for months. Back in May, President Trump signed an executive order significantly expanding the U.S. sanctions framework on Cuba, putting foreign companies and banks that do business with the island at risk. Diaz-Canel has led Cuba since 2018, but is facing an acute economic and energy crisis made worse by the U.S. capture of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, a key ally. Speaking at the White House Thursday, Trump said the U.S. had some, quote, very good plans for Cuba and that Washington had to get rid of the government there, and noted that they don't currently have any money or oil coming in. Trump also suggested that he would, quote, take care of the situation after the U.S. operation in Iran finishes. Secretary of State Marco Rubio framed the move in human rights terms, saying the U.S. would stand for the fundamental freedoms of the Cuban people and called the island nation's leadership illegitimate. In recent months, the Cuban president has called Washington's pressure campaign, quote, fascist, criminal, and genocidal. Ira Spitzer for A News in San Francisco.
The murder of student Henry Novak continues to dominate headlines in Britain following the sentencing of his killer to life in prison. But the case has moved beyond the courtroom, fueling protests, political pressure, and a wider debate over policing, public trust, and online responsibility. A News' Zainab Farajzadeh has more.
The murder of student Henry Novak continues to dominate headlines in Britain following the sentencing of his killer, Vikram Digwa, who was jailed on Monday for life with a minimum term of 21 years. The case has triggered widespread public anger and protests in Southampton, some of which turned violent. Police say officers were injured and arrests were made as tensions escalated outside the police station and in surrounding areas. At the center of the debate is now the wider political fallout. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has warned that the case is being exploited to fuel division, urging restraint from across the political spectrum. He has directly accused tech billionaire Elon Musk of inflaming tensions online after Musk posted messages calling for people to widely share footage of the incident and criticizing how the case has been reported in mainstream media. Starmer has stressed that Britain must not allow a tragic murder to be turned into a political weapon and has echoed the pleas of Henry Novak's family, who have asked for calm and warned against the case being used to drive hostility. Starmer also met Henry Novak's family at Downing Street on Thursday, praising their dignity and resilience. He said it was vital to learn lessons and deliver justice to honour Henry's memory. Opposition figures, including Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, have raised concerns about policing decisions and have accused authorities of so-called two-tier policing, claims which have been strongly rejected by ministers. Police leadership says the case has understandably sparked intense public emotion, but also warns that officers were acting in fast-moving and chaotic circumstances where misleading information was given at the scene. Meanwhile, the Independent Office for Police Conduct investigation remains ongoing, examining how officers responded in the final moments before Novak's death, with further findings expected in the coming months. The body cam footage released in the case has continued to fuel a debate nationwide, raising difficult questions about policing, public trust and political responsibility. Zainab Farajzadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Russia and Uzbekistan have taken a major step in their strategic partnership with the launch of an integrated nuclear power plant in Uzbekistan. For the first time, both small-scale and high-capacity nuclear reactors will be built on a single site. Dasha Chernysova has more.
Russia and Uzbekistan have marked a milestone of their partnership as Presidents Vladimir Putin and Shavkat Mirziyoyev jointly launched the construction of Uzbekistan's first nuclear power plant. The ceremony took place via the video link from St. Petersburg, where the two leaders also held bilateral talks at the Constantin Palace. The project, combining small and high-capacity reactors, is being hailed as a cornerstone of cooperation between Moscow and Tashkent and is expected to strengthen Uzbekistan's energy security for decades to come. During the talks, bilateral relations were front and center, including major infrastructure projects, economic cooperation and humanitarian ties. President Putin highlighted that trade between the two countries grew by more than 12% in 2025 and pointed to rising Russian investment in Uzbekistan's economy. Both leaders emphasized the momentum in economic ties as construction begins on the first unit of the integrated nuclear power station. President Mirziyoyev added that Uzbekistan's participation in the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum is opening new opportunities and fostering a deeper understanding between partners. The discussions underscore the growing cooperation between Russia and Uzbekistan as they pursue major long-term investment and energy projects. Dasha Cherneshova for A News in Moscow.
Environmental leaders have gathered in Samarkand to review global climate funding and set priorities for the years ahead. With new financing approved and the next funding cycle now in focus, delegates are calling for faster action on biodiversity, water security and climate resilience. Sevilla Rajapova reports.
The 8th Global Environment Facility, or GEF, assembly has wrapped up in Samarkand after several days of discussions involving government officials, international organizations, scientists and environmental experts from around the world. During the event, participants reviewed the results of the GEF 8 funding cycle, which has supported environmental projects across dozens of countries since 2022. According to figures presented at the Assembly, the program helped restore more than 10 million hectares of degraded land, contributed to the protection of 1.9 billion hectares of marine areas, and supported efforts expected to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2.3 billion tons. The Assembly also approved $232.5 million in new financing for 24 environmental projects and programs focused on biodiversity conservation, climate adaptation and sustainable development.
What I consider most important is that the initiative was put forward for us to become donors to this fund. This is very significant. As you know, I work on issues related to arid regions. More than 50% of the world's land consists of arid and semi-arid areas. Uzbekistan faces serious water challenges and has developed a great deal of scientific expertise in this field. Therefore, I believe Uzbekistan should focus particularly on arid regions. This issue affects many parts of the world, from Australia, one of the most arid continents, to Africa, South Russia, Central Asia, and increasingly even the Americas, where aridization is becoming more widespread. For this reason, we intend to contribute specifically to projects and initiatives that address these pressing and relevant challenges.
A major focus of the discussions was the next funding cycle, known as GEF 9. Delegates outlined priorities for the period leading up to 2030, including ecosystem restoration, water security, climate resilience, sustainable food systems, and greater involvement of local communities, women and young people in environmental decision-making. Participants also highlighted the importance of increasing private sector investment and strengthening international cooperation to address growing environmental challenges, including climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation and water security.
So the GEF 9. So the GEF 9 now is really going into an aspect of integration. So they're what are called integrated programs. This is absolutely amazing because nature does not exist in silos. Nature is not just, I'm water here and then I'm a tree over here and then I'm air. No, it does not exist that way. So what is exciting about these integrated programs is it's looking at issues such as pollution, biodiversity, plastics, cities. People will be living more and more in cities and much more. This is absolutely exciting. How do we weave all of this together and make sure that how we approach the environment is a very integrated approach?
The Assembly concluded with a call for accelerated action during what organizers described as a critical decade for achieving global climate and biodiversity goals. It is Sevilla Rajapova reporting from Samarkand, Uzbekistan, A News.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is expected to visit Central Asia later this year, as Washington signals a deeper push for economic and diplomatic engagement with the region. A News' Fariza Kalimurzina has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will visit Central Asian countries later this year. Speaking at the hearing before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Rubio also confirmed plans for a C5+1 meeting. But the planned visit was not the only major signal. The Trump administration appears to support repealing the Jackson-Vanik Amendment for Central Asian countries, an issue Kazakhstan has been raising with Washington for years. The amendment was introduced in 1974 and restricted trade with countries accused by the United States of violating human rights and limiting freedom of immigration, primarily the Soviet Union. While it largely lost its original purpose after immigration restrictions were lifted in the late 1980s, it was never formally repealed. Several former Soviet states, including Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, Armenia, Ukraine, Moldova and Russia, later had the restrictions removed. The remarks come at the time of growing engagement between Washington and Central Asia. The second Central Asia-US summit held in Washington late last year, Kazakhstan signed more than 30 agreements with American companies valued at over $17 billion. Uzbekistan, meanwhile, announced trade and economic agreements with the United States totaling up to $175 billion, along with the cooperation on rare earth minerals. And against this backdrop, experts say repealing the Jackson-Vanik Amendment could signal a new phase of closer economic engagement between the United States and Central Asia. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A-News.
Turkey's president has hosted Niger's leader in Ankara, where the two sides signed a series of agreements aimed at expanding cooperation. Adam Morrow reports from Istanbul.
Turkey is strengthening its ties with Niger and Africa's wider Sahel region, with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan holding talks in Ankara on Thursday with the president of Niger, Abdurrahmane Chiani. Following the meeting, delegations from the two countries signed a range of agreements covering defense, security, trade, and economic cooperation. Speaking at a joint press conference, Erdogan reaffirmed Ankara's commitment to expanding its presence across Africa based on what he described as equal partnership, mutual respect, and common interest. The Turkish leader also voiced support for African countries confronting security challenges, especially those facing instability and militant violence in the Sahel region. Stretching across the southernmost latitudes of North Africa, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea, the Sahel region has undergone a profound political transformation in recent years. Since 2020, a series of military coups has swept across the region, beginning in Mali and later spreading to both Burkina Faso and Niger, where President Chiani rose to power in 2023. The three military-led governments have since withdrawn from the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, and formed a new regional bloc known as the Alliance of Sahel States. They have also significantly reduced military and political ties with the West, especially former colonial power France, while expanding relations with alternative partners, including Russia. Against this backdrop, Turkey has sought to expand its diplomatic, economic, and security footprint across the continent, presenting itself as a partner focused on development, infrastructure, trade, and defense cooperation. The agreement signed in Ankara on Thursday underscore the growing importance that both sides attach to their relationship at a time of major geopolitical realignment, especially in the Sahel region. This is Adam Morrow for A-News in Istanbul, Turkey.
The 3+3 regional cooperation platform held a meeting on the sidelines of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. The format brings together Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan alongside their three neighbors, Russia, Turkey, and Iran. But as has been the case since the platform was launched, Georgia was absent. Nini Nikolashvili reports from Tbilisi.
The 3+3 format was proposed in 2021, largely driven by Russia and Turkey in the aftermath of the Second Arab War. The idea was to establish a standing regional cooperation platform for the South Caucasus, one that would address issues of connectivity, trade and stability among the 6 nations that share the region without the involvement of Western institutions or partners. The 3+3 regional cooperation platform convened its first session on Friday during the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in Russia. Georgia's set, however, was empty, as it has been at every 3+3 meeting to date. Tbilisi's position is formal and consistent. Georgia does not participate in this format. The Foreign Ministry has stated this repeatedly, and today was no different. The reasons are well established. Georgia and Russia have had no diplomatic relations since the 2008 war, when Moscow unilaterally recognized the breakaway Georgian regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. For Tbilisi, engaging within any framework where Russia sits as a formal and equal partner is fundamentally incompatible with its foreign policy course. Georgia holds EU candidate status and remains constitutionally committed to Euro-Atlantic integration, making participation in a Russia-anchored regional platform a political and diplomatic contradiction. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
The UN is warning that environmental challenges are becoming an increasingly serious threat to Afghanistan's future. From drought and water shortages to pollution and land degradation, the impact is being felt across communities already facing significant economic pressures. Tamim Bahis has more on that in Kabul.
UNAMA says Afghanistan is facing growing environmental pressures that are threatening livelihoods, food security and stability. Drought and water shortages remain the biggest concern, especially in rural areas where agriculture is the main source of income. In the south, rivers are drying up, rainfall is declining and groundwater is being overused. The impact is already severe. Crop production is falling. Safe drinking water is becoming harder to access, and some families are being displaced in search of water. UNAMA also warns that contaminated water is increasing the risk of disease. Women and children are among the worst affected. In many communities, women and girls are responsible for collecting water, making the crisis not only environmental but also a gender issue. The UN mission also points to flash floods, dust storms, deforestation, pollution and poor waste management as worsening the situation. UNAMA says solutions exist, including better water management, efficient irrigation and community-led environmental action. But it says urgent and coordinated support is needed to protect lives, livelihoods and Afghanistan's natural resources. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A-News.
Well, that's our show. Thank you so much for watching, and join us again on Monday. And from all of us here at A-News, have a nice evening and a very nice weekend.